Okay, so we're going to talk about how we are preparing to teach about teachers to teach about climate and energy. And this is in conjunction with the Northeast chapter meeting of the Association for Science Teacher Education. There are our panelists and me. So each panelist is going to share what they're doing now and what changes are in store. And I'm just going to hand it off to Beth Klein at SUNY Cortland. And Beth, you want to say hello and tell me when to click the buttons.
Sure. Thanks, Don. So I'm Beth Klein, and I'm a faculty member in the Early Childhood Education Department at SUNY Cortland. My focus age group for my students, they teach, get certification in early childhood and childhood, so birth through grade 6. And I'm also the campus sustainability coordinator, so I have another hat as well. And so I kind of merge those things sometimes in going there. So let's see, we can probably advance the slide there, Don, I think, or yeah, there we go. Just kind of click into there. So some of the things that I do with my students, and again, I may not do all of them every semester, obviously, but over the last few years, try to build some knowledge of climate change issues. I have noticed, thankfully, that more of them are coming with a stronger background in that. When I first started talking about it, I'd ask the students, what do you know about climate change? And their response was, it's controversial. But I'm hearing less of that now, thank goodness. So I do try to build a little bit of knowledge there. Then I have them thinking about, how do we break this down for the students that they're going to be teaching? How do we make it relevant to them? And so I work with them on a variety of different things. One of them is building resiliency and adaptation related PBL units, looking at, storm preparation, drainage bridge issues. So they do some engineering design kinds of things with that they prepare as a unit. Gardening units, food preservation, storage, those types of things. And then I focus a lot on addressing the disconnection from the natural world, because I think that is so closely connected, and I'm sure most of you do as well, with our issue with climate change. And then also the increase in mental health issues, climate anxiety among them. So some of the things I do with my students is I incorporate nature journals as a course assignment, and then help them to work on building that into their structure as they teach, so that they take their students outside on a regular basis. I use a text called To Look Closely, and the author, Lori Rubin's a former second grade teacher in Ithaca. And it focuses on using the natural world to improve literacy and science content knowledge and getting that connection back. So that's a kind of a guide that I use for that. And then we do, at SUNY Cortland, we have a fantastic outdoor education center up in the Adirondacks, which when I came to SUNY Cortland in 1999, I said, I've got to get my students up there. So starting 2000, we started taking our early childhood ed students up there. And as some of my colleagues remind me, when I took my students up 2 weeks ago, I've been taking students up longer than my current students have been alive. So that's kind of a nice thing to bring up to me. But anyway, we've been doing it for a long time. And again, so that we can address the disconnection from nature that my students have, and then help them to address it with their students as well. And then there's some garden-based learning. And I have some photos coming up here. I'll talk a little bit more. So Dawn, if you want to advance. So this is our outdoor education center in the Adirondacks, where we engage our students. The upper left photo there is nature journaling on our February trips. There's a lot of connecting with each other as well as with nature. For some, they've never watched a sunset, so we make sure we take time to do that, or a sunrise. can't always get them up early enough for that, but some of them will. We'll do a morning kayak in the fall trips and things like that. And the next slide there, Don. And one of the partnerships that we have is with the town of Webb School up in Old Forge. And while we're up for our experience, we actually bring the 3rd through 5th graders up, and my students teach them in an outdoor setting as well. So they get connected, looking at that and discussing different kinds of things that they're seeing, changes that they're seeing over time, and collecting data and making observations. So that's kind of a nice way for my students to see how interested and engaged the students are in an outdoor setting. So that helps them to know they need to grow their skills there as well. And the next slide there, these are just from today. So we have a campus garden on our campus. And so I work with my students to work with them on building garden-based activities. We had the preschoolers from our campus daycare come up today and participate in different activities that my students were leading with them. And again, gardening is part of the, resilience education that I try to work with my students on, and those types of things. So kind of my focus is to build that connection with nature, as well as building a skill base in gardening and other types of resilience related, regenerational related items for climate change, so that they can see how they can make a difference. My students, and I'm sure some of those that you work with as well, feel kind of helpless when it comes to climate change. They don't know what they can do. And I think it's a problem that can't be solved, and or if it can be solved, it can't be solved at their level. And so this, working with them on garden-based activities, the adaptation units and things like that, gives them something that they feel like they can do to help and proceed in that manner. All right, next slide there, Dawn. So I do want to put a shout out to the Wild Center at Tupper. I've worked with them on a number of times when I brought my environmental studies class up there, and with a variety of teacher professional development programs, including the master teacher program. They just have a number of climate change related exhibits, films, workshops that they can provide. They've set up a Master Teacher Climate Institute for us 2 summers ago, that included Science on a Sphere, which is the photo on the right there. Had some hands-on climate action, tinkering and solutions activities. And then they also do the Youth Climate Summit and provide a lot of resources for other areas to do youth climate summits themselves, and or you can go to their summit as well. So I did want to put a shout out to those resources as well. I've used quite a bit. And quickly for the future, we've got a edible food forest, perennial gardening project in process, as it's, gets slowed down through bureaucracy, but we're still moving forward. I've had some students do some guerrilla gardening and plant apple trees and things where they weren't supposed to, but so far they're still there. And because they're not pleased with the slow pace that sometimes it takes to move things forward. But we've got that hopefully going, and then working with local schools and communities. Our Homer Village, which is next door to SUNY Cortland, is working on their own edible food forest, those kind of projects. Also expanding, addressing and researching pre-service teacher climate anxiety through nature-based activities. So I really want to kind of delve in a little bit more about, how does my nature-based related activities help with climate anxiety, or do they? So that's something I want to delve into a little bit more. And then more work on regeneration-related content and lesson development, reforestation, soil health, those types of things. Working with my science content colleagues to, because they teach our intro content courses, integrated physics and chemistry, and our earth and life science courses for our students, to make sure that more of the climate change related content's delivered in there. And then we're working on a sustainability certificate and a minor, which will overlap with our environmental studies concentration for a major. So hopefully getting more students to deal. And then of course that contains a lot of climate change related content in that. So that's where we are. Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. I'll note I got my master's in earth science education from SUNY Cortland in 1990 and wish I had you for a professor.
Thanks, Don.
Okay, off to Regina.
Hi, everyone. Regina Toolin from the University of Vermont. My primary area is secondary education. I teach courses in science methods and curriculum and practicum, pretty heavy into practicum right now. I'm spending a lot of time out in schools. I've had the opportunity to work on a number of funded grants through the years, and I'm going to talk about two of them today that have a lot to do with climate change education. And one is called the NSF Inspires program, a very long title. Leveraging intelligent informatics and smart data for improved understanding of northern forest ecosystem resilience. And so this has been a collaboration between the University of Maine, University of New Hampshire, and the University of Vermont. We were first funded in 2019. And essentially, in a nutshell, this project was to expand the data that we can retrieve from the northern forests by installing a lot of sensors throughout the Northeast. And so thus the big data acquisition. I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot more sensors in these forests than there were 4 or 5 years ago. And so there was a lot of collaboration between computer scientists, data science, forestry scientists, and looking at big questions around climate change and what's going on in the northern forests. One arm of this project was teacher professional development program called the Inspires Teacher PD program. And so we worked with a group of teachers from primarily Maine and Vermont in sort of aligning with the scientists, learning about the research of the project, and then thinking about how this would then be integrated into the middle school and the high school curriculum. So we lucky enough to have 8 teachers work with us over a period of 3 years. Everybody stuck with us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide, but I'm going to just do a brief introduction to the other project, which is called the Gear Up CREST program. And CREST stands for the Champlain Research Experience for Secondary Teachers. And this has been an ongoing program for 10 years now on Lake Champlain. It's a week-long professional learning experience for secondary teachers in grades 7 through 12. It's funded by the Federal Gear Up grant. We're a subcontractor of VSAC, which is the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, which actually got the grant. I think it's a 7-year grant. And so I've been lucky enough to sort of tag along with that and get some great funding to run this program every year. And so again, we work with limnologists and ecologists and a number of other scientists at this wonderful lab that sits on Lake Champlain, the Rubenstein Lab, and this wonderful research vessel called the Melisira. So not only do we get to sort of be near the lake, around the lake, but we get to be on the lake with the scientists learning about this great stuff about Lake Champlain. And so I'll talk about them a little bit more in the slides that are coming up. So the Inspires program, like I said, has been ongoing since 2019. We had 5 teachers from Maine, 8 teachers from Vermont. We had a pretty robust staff, myself, a science educator, another science educator from New Hampshire, 4 STEM education researchers from Maine, and a pretty large staff. University of Maine has a wonderful science education center called the University of Maine Rise Center. If you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. We had at least 8 to 10 project scientists working with us, sharing forestry research throughout. What you see in the upper right-hand picture there is all of us at the Schindel Institute at Acadia National Park 1, 2, 3 summers ago. And with a team of researchers, if you see, we're standing next to a suite of sensors there that the teachers were pretty much involved in siting and installing that sensor for a couple of days in the forest. So that's part of the work that we did that year, including lots of other projects. I just love that picture. It really captures sort of a lot of happy teachers and staff, because it was hard work, and people were proud of the work and having that sensor, which you name it, it's just snow depth, precipitation, oxygen, carbon dioxide, light, lots of other things are sort of going on in that box. And yeah, so yeah, so the other, let me see if I just want to say anything more. Go back, yeah, one more time. So year 1 was COVID. It was our planning year. Year 2, we continued to sort of work together. It wasn't until year 3, I think. Is that true? Nope. Year 2, we did year 2 in the summer of 21. We were at Schindel. We went to University of Maine the following year to work more with diving deeper into forestry research, connecting with scientists, more scientists. And we were up in Orono for that. This past summer in June, we had our culminating experience with the teachers at the University of Vermont, looking at quantitative reasoning and context. And a big part of like the past year or so was teachers working on curriculum that they had developed as part of this project. Okay, now I'm ready to talk about the next one. Thank you. So as I said, the CREST program, wonderfully sort of supported by VSAC and the Gear Up grant over the past 10 years. We've probably impacted about 165 teachers through this program in that time. We have an enormous staff at times with STEM educators. We have high school teachers who are on board, both math and science, the scientists at the Rubenstein lab, graduate students, undergraduate students coming in to work with us, but also teach us about the research that they're engaged in at the labs. And we've partnered with a number of different people, and I'm sure I'm not doing justice to all of them, but the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, the Lake Champlain Sea Grant, Shelburne Farms. We were at the Audubon in Richmond, Vermont this year. So each year is a different program. I mean, there's elements that are very similar in terms of the underlying thrust of climate change research pertaining to Lake Champlain and the Lake Champlain region. But we really try to give teachers a taste of that from a lot of different perspectives and places. So, and underlying all of this work is our firm belief that in order for teachers to experience learning in the field, they need to understand strategies for learning about place and project-based learning. So we're out, either we're on the lake, in the lake, around the lake, or in various places and streams and urban landscapes, sort of looking at questions related to climate change and thinking about these models of place and project-based learning. I've said a fair bit of this, yeah. So what are we doing? We'll continue to be funded with CREST, and I'll continue to take the funding until they say it's no longer, and then I'll look for more funding, because this is probably the highlight of my career in terms of the work that I do at UVM, and probably more importantly for the teachers of Vermont, and just the crew, the staff that who have come to work on this project over the years. It's just delightful to sort of work with all these people. So one great thing is that they retired our old research vessel, which was called the Melisira, and we just got a brand new state-of-the-art research vessel that was delivered in August from New York. And you know, it's going to be part of the program going forward. So we're going to continue to provide teachers with opportunities to engage in these experiences at the labs and on the lake. I have not plugged in. I've got 5% left, so it's good that I'm about to like finish my presentation. I will find my power cord. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. And I'm going to hand it off to Tammie.
Thanks, Don. You can populate the screen and I'll talk while you're doing that. So I have a very unique position in Pennsylvania. I work for the Pennsylvania Department of Education, but my position is actually funded by our Department of Environmental Protection, our Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Agriculture, and the Department of Ed. So I have 4 bosses, and it's fun because then they also ask me to partner with other organizations like our PennDOT or the Department of Health. All of these groups work together in Pennsylvania. We have an executive order to address climate change within the capacities of all of our organizations. Those of you who know me know that I also live a second life and am a returning graduate student at Lehigh with Al Bodson. And our focus there as well is how to teach about the environment in a multitude of ways. My focus has long time been climate change and watershed education or watershed literacy. So in my work life, I get to bring all these pieces together. Part of what we do in Pennsylvania is not only do we teach the teachers, help them prepare, help the pre-service teachers to address the standards. We've actually gone back very recently and reviewed our standards. We have a whole new set of standards related to environment, technology and engineering, and science. And they are founded in NGSS style. But as our team looked at things, they looked at the research, they identified that there was a good deal of gap related to environmental issues and related to climate change in particular. So we went back in, and I'll show you those standards in a little while, and they wrote a complementary set to integrate into the NGSS style standards. Those of you who are familiar with Pennsylvania, we have 500 school districts. We have local control. We have 67 counties. Not one of those counties runs a district. So it's interesting. But now what we're doing is we're working together in teams to help educate both in how to frame the understandings about climate change and environmental issues and aligning it to the standards. So we have been out field tripping to all parts of the state doing professional development, and it's multi-day professional development. We're actually trying to teach the educators how to look at local phenomena and adapt what they need so their kids are focusing in a local context. We do this with several partnerships. One of them is the Pennsylvania Pathways to Green Schools. Those of you who are familiar with the U.S. Department of Ed Green Ribbon School Program, there's 3 pillars. One of them is related to environmental impacts. One is student health, wellness, community health and wellness. And then there's one on curriculum integration. So in our work, we're working not just with educators to adapt their teaching, but we're also working with administrators so they understand the importance of designing an environmental literacy plan to align with their curriculum. Looking for evidence. We have 2 main projects that are supporting this work. The Pennsylvania Environmental Literacy Network is funded through a NOAA BWET grant for the Chesapeake Bay region. And yes, that includes New York and Pennsylvania. We both have watershed drainage into the Chesapeake Bay from our locations as far north as where Beth is. And I would say I think it's 56% of Pennsylvania. In that work, we have goals that are required through the NOAA Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And that includes environmental literacy, and sustainability and climate change are a big piece of it. We are in our 7th year of funding. First round was 3 years, and we got two-year changes in programming that we were granted. And this program allows us to adapt, apply a regional focus so that the students are actually looking at environmental issues and impacts and connecting them to climate change using the new standards in a very student-centered direction. The Blending MIWI and GIS is an additional program that overlaps both my work and my academic life. And in that, we're using GIS tools to explore watersheds and look for environmental impacts and environmental justice issues. So we just launched the next 8-week class this evening, right before this one started. Then last but not least, we can train the teachers all we want. But part of what we found through the Advisory Council for Environmental Education in Pennsylvania is that the teachers are not getting permission to teach the way they need to teach to explore climate change unless the administrators are keyed into it. So we've started a whole professional development series, which in Pennsylvania, teachers go for Act 48, administrators go for Act 45, and it's a whole process. You'd think working for the Department of Ed, I could have just gotten a quick nod. I had to go through the whole application process as well with our team to make sure that it meets all the criteria necessary. So it's a great program. That one's a 10-week program, and by the time the educators are done, they'll have investigated climate change issues, other environmental issues in their school district, and they will have addressed a plan to integrate education about these issues into their curriculum. If you jump ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, yeah, no, that's good.
Very good. Okay, on to Alexa. Bet and cleanup, except for me, of course. I'm going to say something.
Well, thank you. I'm actually happy to go last because I feel like each of you touched on so many really important pieces that I both learned from, and I also incorporate a lot of place-based and local aspects into my work too, which doesn't necessarily come through on this. But I'm an associate professor. I work in science education at the University at Buffalo, but I also work in curriculum theory. So the main focus actually of my my teaching has been curriculum theory and climate change education. And so for many years I was teaching environmental ed and transitioned it to climate change a couple of years ago with a focus on climate and environmental justice. I have a number of current projects, but I wanted to highlight two of them here. One is we ran a summit on climate and environmental justice at the university this summer. Don was one of our tablists, so that was really awesome. We've applied for funding to try to make that a mainstay here and connect community members and teachers together to work on curricula and develop place-based curricula that is important to the justice-centered issues that are central to Western New York. And then another piece I wanted to highlight is a project I'm working on with a community organization that some of you may have heard of because they've been really huge in Western New York. They took down Tonawanda Coke, and that's the Clean Air Coalition. And so we're working together on a project we're calling Just Communities. we're developing air quality monitoring curricula that's useful and usable both for community members who are really active in the fight to clean up the air in their environments, as well as teachers. I'm also working on climate change education policy with Don and others, and he's going to talk more about that, so I'll leave that there. And I work I'm on a committee for climate justice at the university. And we'll switch to the next one. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about like sort of how I approach climate change education with my teachers, and they're primarily middle and high school teachers, either social studies or science right now. And so we come at it from, a different lens than Beth, say, working with the younger ones. But the guiding questions that I explore with my teachers, sort of the overarching pieces are: how do we heal our relationships with others and with the natural world? And then how do we promote learning in order to create more just, thriving, and regenerative conditions for the land and for all earthly beings, both the human and the more than human? And so my approach to the climate issues is through an interdisciplinary lens, which is as interdisciplinary as the issue itself. And so with my teachers, we examine the history. So we question how we got into this crisis, and we center the disconnect between capitalism and nature, and colonialism and its and racism and our treatment of other humans. We talk about geography. So how do humans interact with and transform their cultural practices and ways of knowing related to the climate? Then we go into politics. That is, who gets a say in identifying and defining the issues and responses to them. And of course, psychology, as we're thinking about the existential crisis of this rapidly changing climate, and what's the anxiety that we each have to deal with as educators ourselves, and then also navigate for our children when they come across into our classes. So if you'll switch to the next one. I have this framework that I utilize. So climate change education is there in the middle, and then I'll just start at the top with power. So it's the recognition of power, our own, identity of ourselves, our relationships to others and to the natural world, and then healing the importance of those interrelationships. And then on the left side, hope. And I think folks have already mentioned this, right? The need for action and activism, so that it's not all doom and gloom, but so that we can actually see how we can be engaged in responsive solutions. And I love how everyone has talked through the ideas of local and place-based pieces, because as I've worked with young people and interviewed them in my research projects, they, through their actions and the activities, they come to see their natural world around them as a place that's different and that's changeable. And it's something that someone in their community can do. So that's really beautiful. And then the next one. And then I wanted to give also another example. So we have these, an example of student work. So in addition to some of our outdoor work that I engaged the students in, such as air quality monitoring and working on rain gardens and things like that, we also have been diving a lot into map literacy, basically. So we've been using EJ Screen, the environmental justice screening tool put out by the EPA. And so I encourage students to sort of think through a story that matters to them, and a place that matters to them, and have them explore this place utilizing multiple maps that are found online, alongside the EJ Screen maps or air quality maps such as Purple Air, things like this. And so here's an image from one of my students' explorations, where he was recognizing that the neighborhood that he grew up in was not impacted by redlining, whereas right across, so he stuck a red line, through the center of both of these to demonstrate where the redlining neighborhoods were, and the redlining is, to the right, and demonstrating that how redlining impacted or has this longer term impact in terms of environmental justice on these communities. So that's one example of some of the project work that we do. And I think that's all I have done.
Thank you. And I've got a few slides myself. I'm going to highlight just very, very quickly. My colleagues and I on PRI's climate team listed there, wrote the teacher-friendly guide to climate change. And we've got a lot of resources that I'll put links into the chat, or one of my colleagues maybe will. And as Alexa mentioned, she and I are both members of the Climate Resilience Education Task Force, which is a group that is working to pass climate change education legislation in New York State. And I'm very happy to note that I think as of this week, we have our first sponsor for the legislation, the model legislation that we've written. And hopefully that will actually pass in the legislative session starting in the spring or in January. And I'm very, very excited about that. And I'll share a slide on that. I'm also one of the many instructors for a program with New York City schools called Teaching Urban Climate Change System Science and Stewardship that is piloting what they're calling a micro-credential. Here are some of our climate and energy resources. Each of these images is linked to the related resource, and I should have updated it to include our NOAA grant. We also have a NOAA BWET grant with Prince George's County Schools down in Maryland. And we've been working with that district on teaching climate change since 2018, I think. They're one of the largest districts in the country with 135,000 students and 28 high schools. And they have a required course called Biogeochemical Systems that every one of those students will take mostly in 9th grade. And there's just lots and lots of resources we have there. And a few words about my undergirding philosophy. Our undergirding philosophy is to engage learners in work that matters to the world outside of school. Make it locally relevant with inquiry and action, make it understandable, and sort of pet peeve of mine maybe is to talk more about fire than carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases, because everyone knows what fire is. That's not true of those other things there. Pay attention to scale, and there's a lot of that could be said about that, and we've got some big ideas for that. Note that emotions matter, and I'll be talking about that in the session 2 weeks from tonight by that title. Let me also say on that the best way to address anxiety, pretty much no matter what the source, is to work on the thing that causes the anxiety, and ideally do that in community. So here is the platform for the Climate Resilience Education Task Force, and we can put those links in the chat. And the model legislation that we have drafted addresses all of those things, and I'm cautiously optimistic we'll get that bill passed. The micro-credential will ultimately be a 4-course, I believe, sequence that's starting in spring of 2024. We're trying out some stuff this semester with a small group of teachers, but we hope to ramp that up in the spring. And there's a whole lot of different collaborators. It says everybody but us on that list, but PRI is one of the collaborators on that. And now we're going to go to panelist discussion. I see there's stuff in the chat that I haven't looked at yet, so I'll take a look at that. And just a few questions, and it's 7:50, so I think I'm going to ask us to keep this conversation to less than 5 minutes so that we can open it up for questions. And I'm going to take a look at the chat and see if, and folks have put in some of the links. That's great. I'm going to open it up to the panelists to chime in on whatever one of those questions you want to pick. And I'll note that one of my favorite questions of the last couple of years is if you could change one thing about the educational system to foster more effectiveness around climate and energy issues, what would that one thing be? I will throw it open for questions or for discussion rather with the panelists. And I am going to hold us to 7:55 and then open it up for questions. And I personally can stay as long as people want to stay. We often go an hour and a half in Science in the Virtual Pub. So anybody want to take a stab at any of those questions? Should I call on somebody?
You don't have to call on us. It's okay. I just wanted to share, I know we didn't really touch on sort of the sort of bigger picture, which I mean, I think a lot of folks probably already know this, but I feel like climate change education is like in teacher ed and in schools of education is a little further behind, right? We're still struggling. We're still swimming upstream. We don't have everybody on board. Not everybody thinks it's like it matters quite as much as other issues matter. And so I think we're a little behind, in addition to the fact that we're still pushing on policy. And obviously policy will continue to help make those changes. Because even as I teach these, my students, they're like, yeah, but it's not policy yet. So, you know, what can we really do when we get in the classroom? And so the one thing I would change in our educational system is to put more power into the hands of teachers. Go back to that. We need more.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in here?
Well, yeah, I would agree with what Alexa said, but also time. Looking at schedules now with, especially at the elementary level, they have, like 90 minutes for ELA and this, time for math, and oh, we might get 15 minutes of recess in there. You want me to talk about, climate change related issues or gardening or whatever? We don't have time. So I think that's goes along with that, freedom to let the teachers have more freedom in developing their curriculum and implementing it. So I would agree with that.
Okay. Any other thoughts? It's okay if we.
So yeah, I'm thinking about this idea of freedom and time from the standpoint of Vermont, and coming from New York and having taught in New York as a classroom teacher and also at a number of different universities. There's a stark difference between our neighboring states, Vermont and New York. And a lot of it has to do, obviously, with just sheer size. We are certainly one of the small states, and in many ways, I think the benefit of that is teachers do have more choice and freedom in their curriculum. But then after listening to Tammie's presentation and thinking about what you're doing in New York, I don't really think there's a whole lot of legislation in the way that you all are sort of working and moving and advocating, and wondering if maybe there needs to be a little bit more of a balance in Vermont in that regard. I mean, I have teachers who come to Crest, I have repeaters, which is why I have to change it every year in a lot of different ways. So I know, like, ideas and curriculum and the teachers' sort of will to make climate change and environmental science and place and project-based learning part of their curriculum. But I wonder if maybe we need a little bit more thrust at the state level too.
Yep. Tammie, do you want to throw in a few thoughts?
So even though we have these new steel standards, and we have the MWE, the Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience elements worked into the new standards. We also have a section that is environmental justice in those new standards, where the students are supposed to investigate it. That's all well and good. But when you have 500 some school districts that can all interpret those standards, you have to have a drive from somewhere else. And one of the places that we've seen it is with the schools that have been doing the MWE programs, or with the communities that are doing the Meaningful Watershed Educational Experience programs, we've seen a lot of student action come out of it. And, you know, you all have stereotypes of what all our neighboring states are like and everything. But one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I had nothing to do with it, but there is a school out near Pittsburgh called Woodland Hills School District. And they recently, because of student pressure and community pressure, had the school board pass a call to climate change action. So you have that impact happening. Other school districts are seeing that. They're also seeing, and it's called peer pressure. When one school has a really good program and their kids are doing better on those tests because they actually have learned their science in context and understand the impacts of the science they're learning, that's one of the best things that I've seen turning the tables in Pennsylvania. A group of kids or a school doing better on those judgment tests, and then others following suit. So we have been having others following suit and changing the way they're teaching and changing the menu of what they're teaching.
Okay, there are a couple other bullets here, but I did say we'd go till 7:55 and I'm lied because it's 7:56.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And I'm actually going to, before opening it up generally, I'm going to pick on Cindy, who is a middle school social studies teacher here in Ithaca, and talk, just say a few words anyway about teaching climate change in social studies, if you wouldn't mind. And I warned her.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here tonight. And one of the reasons why I'm here is I see such possibility for interdisciplinary connections that will actually, I think, move forward what you're all talking about in the science area. And it's really exciting to, even if our middle school is not set up in an interdisciplinary structure, it's very traditional in our little boxes. But I've been in great conversations with my colleague teaching earth science and physical science. And I think it really makes it more meaningful for students to apply that knowledge. So if the science teacher is looking at the New York State science standards and sees the increase in the presence of climate change standards, human impact on the environment, we're looking at the historical roots in a US history course of climate change, but also opportunities for civic action for all the reasons that you mentioned around hope and application of their knowledge. We've also learned in our district that around the teacher participation, we need a district policy. So this year we've organized with a representative from every school. We have 12 schools to develop, as some other schools have done around the country. We're going to be advocating for a school district resolution that states that climate change is real and human caused, which not all our teachers actually agree with. And also that we should look both in operations and in curriculum opportunities for sustainable practice. So we're looking to collaborate. It makes it, I think, a really more relevant and interesting educational experience. So I encourage you to check in with your colleagues in all areas, but particularly social studies. We have a lot of opportunities for connecting. So welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. And I'm going to open it up for questions from y'all. So if you want to either raise your hand or put it in the chat, we can do that. And I'm going to put in a link to a Google Doc that I think has all of the links that we talked about here. So questions, comments, stuff you want to hear more about? I'll fill in a little dead space and expand on Cindy's point about the interdisciplinary nature, which was mentioned by other panelists as well. If you think about how energy use has changed over time in human history, whenever we change how we get our energy, we change history as a dominant force. So the Industrial Revolution, we figured out how to get stuff out of the ground and burn it. And that changed the world in oh so many ways. And the economics of this is also a huge social studies issue. And if you don't understand the math of it, you don't get it. And it's worth noting that the National Council of Teachers of English has both a position statement and a book on teaching climate change in the English classroom. So the interdisciplinary nature is just hugely, hugely important.
Can I add to that a little bit? You know, each of our states has their own unique personality. And we have some areas in Pennsylvania, as do other states, that are very hesitant to teach about climate change. There are some really good books from fellow ASTE members, Mark Bloom, and I'm going blank on the gentleman who's out of New York, who co-authored with him, but how to look at issues like religion and beliefs with teaching about climate change, with teaching about evolution. Joe Shaner also wrote another book related to that. So pay attention to that, because you have to pay attention to the beliefs. You just can't come in like sledgehammers.
Mm-hmm. And Ingrid's got a hand up. And while Ingrid is speaking, I will put a link into the exhibit behind me that Ingrid, Rob, Alex, and I were part of the team for. So take it away, Ingrid.
Yeah, I was wondering, for those of you who are preparing teachers to go off and teach about climate change, as you send them off and they're about to start their careers, what's your sense of their feeling about teaching climate change? Like, are they excited to do it, or is it more of a secondary thing and they're more excited about other aspects of teaching? What kind of feedback do you get from your students?
Well, I'll talk about with my students, and you know, of course, my students are going off to teach early childhood and childhood age students, so elementary. So they don't think it's their job to teach about climate change. They think it's a complicated topic that should be taught, you know, high school. So they think they don't have to do it. So that's one of the reasons that I kind of interweave all of the, you know, resilience, adaptation, gardening, you know, those types of things into what they do, so that they realize that that is climate change content, you know, and that you do have a responsibility for teaching it. So that's kind of it. So, and when they see it from that perspective, they feel a little more comfortable, because they don't think, and we talk a little bit about what Tammie brought up about, you know, they're going out, a lot of our placements in our area are in rural schools, where we do have some climate change deniers. And so that we talk about ways to move forward with things, whether or not they believe climate change is real or not, right? So that's my perspective there, and from what I think my students are doing. So
Yeah, and you know, it's probably too obvious to say, but I'll say it anyway, that you know, American teachers hold the beliefs of Americans, and that means everything. So there are teachers who are very excited about it, and teachers who don't believe it, and teachers who are afraid of blowback from the community, and teachers who are excited about engaging with the community and with their students about it. So it's kind of all the answers. Tammie, go ahead.
One of the things that's really important when you're looking about teaching about climate change or any of those ouchy topics is student driven. Have them identify the issues. So you have to teach your teachers, whether you're working with pre-service or in-service, how to model questioning without giving the answers, how to teach students how to understand and recognize sound data find sound resources. And these are all critical thinking skills that disappeared in the last 3 years with many. So just reiterating that, how do you know it's true? Is it really true? Is it really, really true? Are questions that I ask people whenever they're making claims that are a little bit off kilter.
Yeah, and I'll also note that it's really important to recognize that a good explanation, clear evidence is important, essential, but it's not enough in most cases. I love to quote Simon and Garfunkel on this point: "A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. Lie, 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 lie." I think they summed up a lot of educational research very nicely, probably before a lot of that research was actually done. Other comments, questions? Bryce has been unusually quiet tonight.
I was going to say something related to what Tamara just said, that the Doug Lombardi's work looking at model evidence links, especially around climate change, and asking pre-service teachers to read claims that are both scientific and pseudoscientific or non-scientific, and asking them to describe the strength of evidence in support of different models is interesting. It shows that many pre-service teachers don't have the ability to discern much between what is a scientific claim and what is pseudoscientific. So it's deeper than just wanting to avoid the issue of getting into a sticky subject like teaching climate change in a rural community. It also comes down to their ability to really know the difference between what's credible and what's not credible, and understanding the nature of science, and that models require evidence to support them. They're just as likely to accept evidence that is pseudoscientific to support an idea. And I think it goes back to what you just said, Don, right? We hear what we want to hear. Our political beliefs, our community, culture, environment that we're in often dictates how we filter that. And those model evidence link studies that Lombardi and his colleagues have done lend a lot of evidence to that. And pre-service teachers are no more skilled than we would expect them to be in making those decisions about what's credible and what's not.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in there. Project Look Sharp out of Ithaca College has done a nice, really focusing on this issue of critical media literacy, and how to delve into that. And their climate change curriculum, which I put a link in the doc there, I've used with my environmental studies class, and it really, it highlights. It's got the video clips and the talking, and then, okay, here's the citation. This person has a PhD, does that mean that they're credible in what they say? And how to delve into, how do you go a little bit further to say, okay, what is this organization that they represent, and what, who funds this organization that they represent? And, so they get into those kind of things. And that's a great resource too, I think.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of work with the folks at Project Look Sharp, and they're really great. Highly recommend. And that their focus is media literacy, which is just so hugely important as a way to get by in the world without being crazy. Yes, and the Cranky Uncle game. John Cook's work is also really great.
I wanted to ask a question. Those of you who work with middle or high school science teachers, I'm looking at the New York State science standards, and it seems to me it's pretty explicit that climate change is real and it is part of the curriculum. It's not really, do you want to teach it? If you are teaching to the standards, you are teaching about the climate crisis. So I'm wondering how that level of student teacher is working with that information. What's their reaction to that? Or what do you, I guess, promote them to do?
Anybody want to take it?
Actually, sort of a question back at you is, do you mean that from like the standpoint of controversy versus not controversy? Or
science as a science fact, like how to teach the science embedded in the New York State standards is the climate change is not just talking about climate weather in the generic term or the general term, but like in the context of today, it seems pretty explicit that it's part of the science curriculum. So it's not really, there may be controversial aspects, but the actual teaching of climate change as a scientific fact seems to be embedded in the curriculum.
Yeah, and actually it's been there since 1971. The 1971 Earth Science Standards have the greenhouse effect in it. So that's been part of the New York State curriculum for, what is it, 52 years? But it's a really pretty tiny piece of the curriculum. It's bigger in the new standards that are gradually being phased in, but it's still not big. And it does, it does indeed say, that, this is what the science says. But again, it's complicated how people respond to, this is what the science says. That's not something that is universally taken up, let's say, and nor should it be.
I was just going to add, I think my students are pretty comfortable with it. They're comfortable with their understanding of it and teaching it. I think they're less comfortable with ideas of controversy and those sorts of things. And so we talk through aspects of, like I put that link in the chat for this book on teaching controversial topics by McAvoy and Hess. And they did a ton of research on schools and teachers who were engaged in teaching controversial topics. And they talk through how the science of it is not controversial, the politics is. And so it's actually not really right for us to address it or to pose it to our students as a controversial topic if it's not. So they sort of talk through those types of issues, as well as sort of how to kind of engage in things like dialogue and deliberation and discussion. So these are all, sort of these key elements of our democracy, or they should be. And I think that's also kind of that recognition that sometimes we're policing each other. And in schools, we get policed by each other, right? So like one of my science teachers this week told me that she mentioned to her students that if they don't like the way something is, that maybe they should investigate who they're voting for, and they should vote for someone who's also interested in that topic. Not saying how to vote or who to vote for, just the word vote. And was attacked in like the school lunchroom by another teacher who was like, I can't believe that you would use the word vote, right?
Yeah.
We are in a democracy, so yeah.
Yeah, and I'll note that Rob and I have been parts of workshops for several years. It's been a number of years since we've done it on teaching controversial issues writ large, mostly in science. And we wrote a book called The Science Beneath the Surface, a very brief guide to the Marcellus Shale. I think I got that right, which is about hydrofracking. And you might think, what are we, masochists for wanting to do this stuff where people kind of routinely attack us? And the reality is, no, that's not especially fun. But controversial issues are controversial because they're important, and they're engaging to students, and they should be. And as Alexa said, they're generally politically controversial, not scientifically controversial. But if we shy away from teaching those things, we are doing just a huge disservice. And my motivation for being a science educator for all of these years now, all of these decades now, is to prepare people to meet their civic responsibilities. And so that's the purpose, that's the key purpose of science education for me, is to get people ready to meet their civic responsibilities. And if you don't know some key science, you're not going to be very good at meeting your civic responsibilities. Maybe one more question, comment before we close up for the night. Or maybe not. Yes, and Alexa's comment there on meeting our students where they are is also very important. And I guess I'll maybe close by saying, join us in a couple of weeks when we'll be talking about some of the emotional issues connected to this. We're not always about climate change, but this for the next few weeks we are. So it's been great having you, and I am very glad that Science in the Virtual Pub is back on the air, so to speak. And thanks all for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for bringing this together.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Have a great night.